So my topic is with the how to close lung tunnel. I will start by saying that lung tunnels are a common finding in either aneurysmal septums and or thick secundum. So it's a very frequent additional finding when the anatomy is not usual. So I'm going to start by showing an intracardiac echo image of a patient. You get the sense that the tunnel is lung based on the initial appearance. You can see here in color that in addition to a potentially lung tunnel, there's a bit of a floppy primen, although I don't think it meets the criteria of an aneurysm, but there's a little buckle of the primen right at the interface.
Certainly looks like there's redundant tissue.
Exactly. So I'll start by saying, how do you measure the PFO tunnel? And I think we alluded to this in some details. In my point of view, you have to measure from the interface between the primen and the secundum at the fossa ovalis to the insertion of the primen in the left atrium. So I'll illustrate this here. We have again, my intracardiac echo image. We obtain a still frame, and then we draw a line that would go from the fossa ovalis to the point where the primen inserts in the left atrium, and in this case it's 15 millimeters. But I also want to point out that I truly only measure the tunnel when I have not only the catheter, but the Amplatz extra stiff wire, because that's going to tell me not only the true length of the tunnel, but the compliance of the tunnel as well. Because if you have an Amplatz wire like this one, in which you can have the sense that the wire being stiff is traversing the entire length of the tunnel and it's not exiting the left atrium right at the fossa ovalis, this is what I would consider a relatively restrictive tunnel.
Right.
Because the primen doesn't allow the wire to really come into the left atrium right at the middle of the fossa ovalis. So
I think that's a great point because I'm often fooled about the length of the tunnel.
Right.
What I see visually up there,
correct,
many times it's longer. As I look at the J-tip portion going through, and it suddenly pops, well, that's obviously the exit point.
Right.
And it often doesn't match up with what I see visually.
Correct. So in this example, as I freeze the image, you can see now that in the same patient, now with the wire, I can definitely see in more detail what the length of the tunnel, and it indeed is actually 5 millimeters longer just by using the wire.
I have a practical question. So with both of the approved devices on the market in the United States, there are essentially two sizes that we use. The standard size, the 25, or the upsize. So when do you open the device? Do you open, if you put down the ICE catheter, or put up the ICE catheter, it looks like a standard run-of-the-mill PFO, you're gonna open up a 25. But do you wait until you cross with the stiff wire first to see the play of the septum before you decide to open up a 25 or a larger device? When do you make that decision?
Absolutely. I only open it when the Amplatz extra stiff wires through the PFO, and I get this measurement that I just showed.
Absolutely. For all the reasons we talked about before in being relatively imprecise in judging the number of bubbles that go through and the size of the defect, it's not till you cross with a wire that you realize what you've really got.
Right.
It's just can't tell that information anatomically with either TE or ICE without getting up there and probing it. And we've all had the other opposite problem.
Right.
We get up there, it's a positive bubble study, person has no other risk factors for having had a stroke, and you get up there and the wire won't go through, and you've pushed and probed, and it's not like it's completely, like the other case that we showed, it's still markedly positive. Turns out that there's really nothing there. You've got something that may be 2 or 3 millimeters or less, in which case you take the patient off the table and say, listen, I don't think this is relevant. So it goes both ways. You can be surprised by finding out that it's more open than you thought, or you had a positive bubble study, even though it may have been mild, and you go up and you check it and you find out it really wasn't that significant.
Yeah, or there's no PFO at all.
Or there's no PFO.
Exactly. So
after we put the wire, we realized this is 20 millimeters, and it brings the question, what is considered a lung tunnel? I think that there's debate about the definition. I think you could probably consider a lung tunnel if it's starting to look more than 10 millimeters, but I definitely would say that if you're more than 15, or particularly 20, that's what I would define the tunnel as being long. I don't know what your opinion of.
I think 10's a good cutoff.
Yeah, for probably.
But it's usually longer than you think.
Right,
Yep.
Especially with the wire through.
Yep.
So what are the options that we would have to close a PFO with a lung tunnel? I think you can try to do it through the tunnel itself and use a device that has a high radial strength, meaning that the disc will be allowed to come together due to the strength that the device has in bringing them towards the fossa ovalis, and I would say that's a characteristic of the Gore device. You can use a transeptal puncture, as John used in his case, or you can do this balloon pull technique, which basically I've done only one. It was popular in the early stages, in which you basically avert the priming by pulling through a balloon and then makes it almost like an ASD rather than a PFO. I haven't used this in a long time. So this case that I illustrated, we shows the 30 millimeter Gore device, and you can see here in the eyes how nicely the right atrial disc approaches the fossa valley, which effectively is wrinkling the priming and making it accordion into the fossa itself. And you, go ahead.
I want to bring out an important point, particularly for new implanters. When you look at this top left corner and you look at the septum primum, it often doesn't look like it's going between the two discs.
Right. Yeah.
And when I have two discs here, and then I have a primum that goes up like this, and unless it's like the magic bullet, I mean, it's going this it's actually going like this in a zigzag fashion.
Right.
But unless you pull back and separate the disc and see that they're in between there, you're often not sure if I capture it at all.
And the other point is, you will not see the left disc, in some views, touch both the septum secundum and septum primum before you deploy the right atrial disc because of the concavity of the interatrial septum.
Correct.
So you saw here that your left disc is touching very nicely the septum secundum. You didn't really care all that much about the septum primum at this point because you then recorded your deployment of the right disc, and you can actually see, because the right disc comes out and then in,
grabs,
it grabs from the outside in, that it's going to grab there. And that's a really nice picture.
I knew I had to bring this to illustrate what you said before about recording the right atrial disc deployment, because it's key to know that you actually have grabbed the septum. And I tell my fellows, always check the device in at least two views.
Yep.
So you have to do the bicable view here, as you see in it, and then also check it in the short axis. And this patient did very well with that residual shunt.